Mr. Chair, Dwight, I just wanted to give you a heads up that I have to leave at 3:15, just in case we're not done by then.
Thank you, Barb. We should be done before then.
Yeah, I thought so, but just in case.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chair, we are now live. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Brittany. I'll call this meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Would any member like to add any distance to the agenda? Seeing none. The recommendation here that the agenda be approved as presented. Do I someone to move to put it on the floor, please? Moved by Barb, second by Steve. Is there any discussion on the motion before us? Madam Clerk, will you take the vote, please?
As this is procedural, if I could just have a show of hands from all the members for those in favor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and that carries.
Thank you. Declaration of pecuniary interest. You can declare anytime you see fit during the meeting. Minutes of the previous minutes. I have a recommendation that the minutes of the Township Joint Board of Management meeting held on December 8th, 2020 be adopted. Does the board, do I have someone to move put on the floor, please? Moved by Sue, second by Paul. Does the board have any questions or comments? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, you take the vote, please.
When I call your name, please indicate whether you are for or against the motion as presented. Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton.
For.
Councillor Paul Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Steve Bartley.
For.
Mayor Barb Klumpus. Barb, you are muted.
So, 4.
Thank you. And Mayor Dwight Burley.
4.
Thank you, and that carries.
Thank you. Moving on to our agenda, we have no presentations today, no delegation. Public question period. Madam Clerk, were there any questions submitted by the public?
There was not.
Thank you. We're down to correspondence. We have correspondence from the BDO 2021 Audit Planning Report. Madam Treasurer, would you like to speak to this? Cassie?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is just their standard communication each year, letting you know that they're planning to do our audit. They're actually starting next week. So staff have been working hard pulling that year end together, and we anticipate the final results being presented to the board in April.
Thanks, Cassie. Does the board have any questions or comments? Seeing none. This was just for information. So we'll move on to our agenda. Staff reports. Dispatch servicing agreement. A recommendation here that Township Fire Department Joint Board of Management hereby approves the fire dispatch servicing agreement, and that said agreement be forwarded to both councils of the Township of Georgian Bluffs and the municipality of Meaford for enactment. Someone to move, put on the floor, please. Moved by Steve, second by Barb. Acting Fire Chief, would you like to speak to this? Jeff?
They're just trying to get unmuted this time. If there's any questions, I could take questions from the board. I have nothing really to address on this.
Thank you, Jeff. Do the boards have any questions? Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Dwight. And Jeff, the communications, is that what this is dealing with? It's going up $21,000. Can that be explained?
Well, with this now, this is just the 46,000 is the dispatching service. And you'll notice there was a $16,000 on the, which is going to be part of the communications itself, part of the new radio system. This is just for paying for the 911 service and being dispatched through police dispatch.
So the radios weren't part of that before?
No, they were not part of that. Every department was their own, manage their own radio systems.
Thank you.
Okay, does the board have any other questions? Sue, go ahead.
Thank you. Jeff, I'm just wondering, is this just a continuation of a contract we've already had in place and this is just renewal of that contract? Or is this an actual new thing we're doing?
No, this is just a continuation of the agreement we had with the city, yes.
Okay. Paul, did I see your hand up? No?
No.
Okay. I see no other questions from the board. Madam Clerk, you take the vote, please.
Okay, when I call your name, please indicate whether you are for or against the motion as presented. Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton.
For.
Councillor Paul Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Steve Bartley.
For.
Mayor Barb Plumpus.
For.
And Mayor Dwight Burley.
For.
Thank you, and that carries.
Thank you. Moving on to the agenda, our next recommendation is that the Township Fire Department Joint Board of Management receives the 2020 year-end report for information. Someone to move, put it on the floor, please. Moved by Sue, second by Paul. Acting Fire Chief, would you like to speak to this?
I'm just having a bit of communication trouble here with my system. I'm gonna I have to slide out and try and re-enter again. I'm getting lots of feedback here.
Okay. Does the board have any questions? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, you take the vote, please.
Yes, I certainly can, Mr. Chair. Prior to doing so, in the absence of the chief, Deputy Redmond, do you have any comments to add to this report for the board?
Not at this time.
Okay. So if there's no other discussion, I'll take the vote. When I call your name, please indicate whether you are for or against the motion as presented. Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton.
Hi, I'm for, but I see Jeff is back on here, or was. He's disappeared again. I wondered if he had something to say before we actually voted.
If there's any questions from the board between Township CAO and myself, we can likely answer them as we've both seen the report. So if you have any questions, we can do our best to answer them prior to my taking the vote.
That's correct.
No, I don't, so I'll vote for.
Okay. So I will take the vote now. When I call your name, indicate whether you are for or against. So Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton has indicated that she is for the motion. Councillor Paul Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Steve Bartley.
For.
Mayor Barb Plumpus.
For.
And Mayor Dwight Burley.
For.
Thank you, and that carries.
Thank you. Moving on, we have no unfinished business. Our new business, our 2021 draft budget. Recommendation is that the 2021 Intertownship Joint Board of Management draft budget be hereby approved, and that the draft budget be forwarded to the Council of Township of Georgian Bluffs, Council municipality of Meaford for final approval. Someone to move to put on the floor, please. Moved by Steve, second by Sue. Madam Treasurer, would you like to speak to this, please? Or do you want to give your presentation? Would be better.
Yes.
You want to go
thank
through
you.
the budget, please, Cassie?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So it's budget time. So the acting fire chief and myself have worked to put together a budget for 2021. We'll go through the presentation, but I encourage questions throughout if something comes to mind. I won't be able to see if you have a comment once I share my screen. So if you raise your hand virtually, Britt will let me know to stop talking so that I can answer your questions. But let's just jump right in. I'm just going to share my screen so that we can go through the slides together. Britt, it's not showing. 1 second. Issue. It's not bringing, it's not recognizing my.
So Cass, I will share my screen and that way you can just indicate when you'd like me to move to your next screen and you
Okay.
can see when people have questions.
But I'm not crazy, right? Like it's not showing up.
Cassie, you look at your face, you're really concentrating.
I know. Well, because normally it like shows you your options along the bottom and it wasn't showing me mine. I swear I've done it before. Okay, thank you, Britt. I appreciate that. You can just go ahead and jump to the next slide. So before we get started in 2021, it's always good to look back at 2020 and the things that we have accomplished. So I asked both the fire chief and deputy fire chief for their 2020 accomplishments, and a few things came to mind. The first being that we successfully negotiated a new collective agreement with our volunteer group. I sat in on those negotiations and it actually went quite smoothly and really well, and we're happy, with the agreement we got pulled together. We've developed a really great working relationship with the city of Owen Sound, our neighbors. We were kind of forced to with the 10th Street Bridge reconstruction, but it really has gotten the two departments working together. The fire chief and deputy fire chief were able to adapt during the pandemic to still provide training to our firefighter group. And we managed to refresh the fire hall a little bit with new paint, new floors, and some improvements to the offices. Next slide, please, Britt. So 2020 wasn't without its challenges, and we've all experienced them. Obviously, COVID really threw a wrench in things, but mainly getting PPE. So when COVID first started, our firefighters were still attending scenes, and we needed to protect them, and it was quite difficult to get the proper equipment to keep our employees safe. And the 10th Street Bridge reconstruction kind of had to change the way that we were providing services to our townships, but I think that was handled pretty well. Jeff and Andy, I don't know if you had any comments at this point about what you wanted to speak to about 2020.
Jeff, Andy?
There you go. Yeah, I just wanted to build up a little more on the working with the city. It has brought us closer together. We have responded to quite a few calls with them. More than we have in the 8 years I've been here. So we have been doing a bit of work with them. So overall, it's been great, and it's brought us to, and hopefully it'll be more in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So next slide, please, Britt. So one of the most important things to look at as part of the 2021 budget is the call volumes, because really call volumes drive our costs. The more calls, the increased costs. The more firefighter wages we're paying, wear and tear on our equipment, gas usage. So for 2020, we had a considerable increase in fire calls, which led to a considerable increase in costs. So the 2021 budget reflects that increase. So you are going to see, quite a bit of changes in some of the budgeted dollars. And when we go through that, we'll identify which ones, are directly tied to call volumes. Next slide, please, Britt. Okay, so this is the high level, what we're proposing for 2021, all the expenses. So the reason why I've given you a snapshot all the way back to 2018 is because 2020 was an unusual year for us budget-wise. Because the fire department and the 2 townships were in the middle of ownership negotiations, it was decided not to spend a lot of money on capital for 2020, because we thought we were moving forward with single ownership, and we didn't want to see both townships putting money in towards capital to then just turn around and pay it back out if the ownership agreement went through. So we didn't really invest in our facilities and replacing capital equipment in 2020, which is why you see such a large decrease in budgeted amounts. So when you look at the 2021 budget, although it is a huge increase from 2020, it is quite comparable to 2019 and 2018 actuals. So that is why I've given you that history so that you can see, 2020 was unusual, but it's time to start reinvesting in our facility, and 2021, we need to start doing that. Next slide, please, Britt.
Brittany or Cassie, before we move forward, can we go back to the slide, please?
Yeah.
Just on the fire board administration, can you explain the trend has jumped from 12,500 to 24,000?
So each of these lines is a detailed slide. So can we go through that as we go through the detailed slides so I can explain that as part of that? Okay. So the first category we're going to talk about is administration. So administration is your telephone, your insurance, audit fees, and basically costs to administer the fire department. And so for 2021, the budget's quite consistent with 2020 and 2020 actuals. One thing that we have done to try to save costs is in 2020, it was identified that the ITFD server had a lot of risks, meaning that it wasn't properly firewalled, safeguarded, it was becoming old, it was old technology. So instead of buying a new server for ITFD, we've put all of their programming onto Georgian Bluff's server. It still has proper, protection to make sure that only those that need to see it are seeing it. But it allowed us to save a lot of money by not having to invest in another server for ITFD. And it's also allowed us to streamline administrative practices. So now Jeff and Andy don't need to necessarily give the Treasury Department certain information, to pay invoices, do invoicing, whatever. We can pull that information ourselves. So that is one thing we implemented in 2020, and it's been working very well. But most importantly, it protects the fire department from any sort of data hacks. Sorry, was there a question? I heard a mic click.
I don't see any hands up,
Okay.
Cassie, but
Okay.
if anyone has any questions, speak up.
Oh yeah, feel free to interrupt me. So we'll move on to the next slide, please, Britt. So when we look at management salaries, basically the fire department now has 2 employees, the acting fire chief and the deputy fire chief. So they are tied, though, to Georgian Bluff's salaries and benefits. So they follow our pay administration practices, as well as are part of Georgian Bluff's benefits group, and then we just invoice it back out to ITFD. So one thing to note is the Township of Georgian Bluffs is currently undergoing an organizational review and a pay review, and the positions of fire chief and acting fire chief are being considered as part of that review. So for 2021, we've budgeted, a cost of living increase as per our current administration policy, but that could change based on that review. As for benefits, the Township of Georgian Bluffs moved to a self-insured program in 2020. you know, hoping that we would save costs, but due to the pandemic, we haven't seen the results of that yet and won't get an accurate picture probably until 2022. So no questions on salaries and benefits. We'll move on to volunteers. Sorry. So this is where we are very call driven. The more calls, the more costs. So 2020, we were well above budget, and we've increased the 2021 budget to better reflect that increase in calls. We also renegotiated the union collective agreement, which saw some increased costs. One of those being, instead of getting a $200 clothing allowance per year, now the volunteers receive $300. So that did have an impact on the cost as well. And in 2020, the board approved ITFD becoming a member of a peer support group, which is being administered by West Gray, I believe, and that cost is $5,000. So that's also reflected in the 2021 budget. Okay, if there's no questions, we can move on to the next slide, please, Britt. Okay, so this is the fire board. So, oh, sorry, Barb, or sorry, Mayor Klumpus.
Go ahead, Barb. You're either muted, Barb, or you've disappeared because I can't see you.
Sorry. I was
There you are.
unmuted and then I muted. Sorry. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to you, Cassie. Can you tell me, please, what is included in the volunteer clothing allowance? Is that personal clothing or is that uniforms?
So that is the clothing.
Bunker gear.
Sorry, that is clothing that they would wear to like a scene. So we give them $300 and they spend it on what they see fit. There's really no regulations around that I'm aware of, unless the fire chief or deputy fire chief have more information on that.
Jeff?
Yeah, that is just the $300 for their personal clothing allowance. As being a member, as part of the union contract, they do get uniforms supplied to them. So everybody has their uniforms now, so that $300 is just for personal clothing. Wear and tear and everything for their clothing.
Does that answer your question, Barb?
Well, it does sort of. Does that mean in terms of steel-toed boots or things like that, is that provided, or would that come out of the clothing allowance?
Cass, are you able to answer that?
I thought the chief was going to.
Yeah, everybody supplied PPE through the collective agreement. They get issued steel-toed like bunker boots. That's what they wear for our calls. At this time, they don't wear. The only time they wear any steel-toed boot is for medical calls or rescues, which the bunker boots or their duty boots will suffice for that.
Okay, so this does not include uniforms or shirts or anything that's supplied to. So this $300 would be just for personal clothing allowance?
Yes,
Is
correct.
that that's right?
Yes. So my understanding through the union negotiations was that, sometimes personal clothing gets ruined attending a scene, especially in a medical call, where you could be first on scene and you're not necessarily wearing the full gear. And as for, we've supplied them with bunker boots, but the unionized guys also wear steel-toed boots while in the fire hall, and this allowance would go towards them purchasing that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Cassie and Jeff, for that. I guess turn it over to you, Cassie.
Okay, thank you. So to the fire board administration budget. So this is the fee paid to Georgian Bluffs for providing administrative services for the board. In my 6 years at the township, this fee has never increased, but the services we provide to the board have. So currently we prepare bi-weekly payroll for the fire chief and deputy fire chief. We prepare the monthly payroll for the volunteer firefighters. Weekly, we do check runs, so we pay all the AP invoices and vendors. Monthly, we do accounts receivable invoicing, where we invoice Georgian Bluffs, Meaford, and MTO for fire call costs. We've now started providing HR services. So if someone's injured, our HR team or person will help them and assist them in filling out the WSIB paperwork and any other forms they may need to complete. And as per direction given in early 2020, or maybe it was late 2019, I think it was late 2019, the fire chief and deputy fire chief now report to the township CAO. So given the increased services, we've decided to increase the cost or the fee paid to Georgian Bluffs for these services. It's something that, you know, if we decide to keep operating in this partnership manner, that we'll have to look at under the establishing agreement to decide how we're going to handle going forward.
Questions?
Okay, I don't see any hands. So, oh, look at Brett's already ahead of me. So next is the communications piece. So this is kind of where Steve's question, or sorry, Councillor Bartley's question from earlier comes into play. So our dispatch contract is the same cost for 2021 as it was for 2020. It's just we under budgeted it because 2020 we saw an increased cost that we weren't anticipating. So the 2021 budget of $48,000 now reflects the correct dispatch services costs paid to the Owen Sound Police Services Board for dispatch. The bottom line of the $16,500, that is the Grey County communications piece. And there was a report taken to the board and to each council for this. And I believe that's an 8-year service or contract or project. And our costs will increase in year 3. Is there any questions on the communications? I see Steve has, or sorry, Councillor Bartley has a question.
Go ahead, Steve.
Thank you, Cassandra. And yes, call me Steve. Feel free to call me Steve. So the $16,000, I understand where it came from. So is there another part of the budget that got reduced because we're not buying radios through that? Did it not come out of the about 5 slides earlier? Because there was a charge before.
So we haven't bought a lot of radios as of late. We've just been repairing them. So I don't believe it was budgeted earlier, unless I'm incorrect, Jeff or Andy.
No, nothing on the radios for budgeting. That's all into the Grey County now.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Floor is yours, Cassie.
Thank you. So safety equipment was a big expense in 2021, and we did not budget for it. We didn't anticipate COVID happening, but once it hit, we needed to buy a lot of PPE for our staff. And so in 2020, we went over budget, purchasing face shields and gloves and masks. And we're anticipating that all those things are still going to be needed for 2021. So we have increased the budget to reflect this. But gloves and boots are replaced on a cycle. So I believe, actually, Jeff or Andy, do you want to speak to how often gloves and boots are replaced?
Yeah,
Yep.
under NFPA, all PPE is 10-year life cycle. And the gloves were part of the union negotiations. We had to buy gloves for them and gear bags. So that's reflected in here if I'm not mistaken. And the boots is, we have an increase in that just to replace old boots. We had to change to a different style of boot. Everybody's getting a leather boot now, and a leather structural firefighting boot would cost a little more than the rubber style we used to have, and you can't get a good quality rubber boot anymore. So we needed to think of our guys in the long term. So that's why there's a bit of an increase, because we did have a bunch of dated boots this year.
And
Okay.
the helmet budget line, they're also replaced according to expiry. So we don't do them all in 1 year. We do a little bit at a time and replace as things expire.
Barb, go ahead. Barb, you're muted.
Thank you. I'm just wondering why there has been no COVID funding with regard to PPE. This would be, I would think, an expense that could be charged to the COVID funds. Was this applied for, or is that, and I know we didn't get a bill for that. Is this something that we should have had some influence on, or at least looked at from the perspective of funding that was available for additional costs related to COVID?
So the COVID funding was not available directly to the ITFD. It was available to Georgian Bluffs and Meaford. Right. So what we can do is, if Meaford wants to use a portion of their funding to go towards some of these costs, we can provide you with the invoices, and then you could use like the 25% or calculate 25% to pay for some of this increased cost. And Georgian Bluffs can do the same on our side. But, it's not up for me to decide, how Meaford wants to spend their funding, or even Georgian Bluffs. But when we get to the capital screen, you will see that we are presenting something that there is an opportunity to use some of that funding for, if you have any of that funding left. And that's something we've been debating at the Georgian Bluffs level. Can we flow some of that funding to ITFD to help pay for that?
I think that's something that we should take forward and have a look at. Thank you, Kathy.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, we'll move forward.
So this is just the fire hall budget. Again, we're really consistent with 2020 budget and actual. Heat, hydro, water, cleaning supplies, insurance, building maintenance, and snow removal. One thing I will note is that, and I didn't mention it when we were talking earlier under administration too, but as I'm sure Meaford's aware, insurance costs for the municipal sector are skyrocketing, and our renewal for ITFD is July 1st. So we did see an increase in July 1st of 2020, and I'm anticipating we're probably going to see another increase in 2021. And that's just the nature of the municipal insurance sector right now. I know on Georgian Bluffs side, we saw an increase of 12.5% across our insurance rates. And in conversations with treasurers from throughout the county, they saw anywhere from 6% to 50% increases. So we'll know a little bit more in a couple months when we get our renewal, but I'm anticipating that going up.
Questions? Seeing none, you got everybody memorized.
Okay, oh, thanks, Brett. So for the training budget, we've kept the budget consistent with 2020 budget. Our 2020 actual was a little bit down because, it took us a while to figure out how to provide training while still implementing COVID measures. But I think at this time, Jeff, would you like to speak to how training has changed through the Ontario Fire College?
This time, as you most will know, that the Ontario Fire College is slated to close in March of this year. They're still talking. The Fire College is still going to exist in principle, as there's going to be the education committees. There's going to be online courses offered. Things will be done through regional training centers as well. At this time, I'm not sure how, they're still not 100% sure on the funding and how it's going to be subsidized moving forward. There's still some unknowns there. But we could see maybe a slight change in our training moving into 2022 as cost-wise for these courses. At this time, there's still a lot of unknowns. Hopefully by the next meeting, we'll have some more information that I can share with you. So this time, it's all that we've been really told is they're closing and they're still going to offer training.
Okay, thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
Next, sorry.
No, I see no questions. Go ahead. Thanks.
Next slide, please, Britt. Okay, so our fleet. This is our trucks, maintenance and repairs, fuel and insurance. As you can see, there was an increase in insurance costs over budget in 2020. We had additional repairs, and our fuel charges were in line with what was budgeted. So we've just increased the 2021 budget to reflect the increase in insurance costs, both realized and what we anticipate in July 1st, 2021, as well as to better reflect the cost of repairs on our trucks. So I will say that in 2021, we will be working on the ITFD asset management plan and looking at all of our vehicles, looking at the optimal replacement dates, and really looking at our service levels as well and determining how many trucks we need to maintain at the fire department. Okay.
Question. Seeing none.
Thanks. So this is just everything that didn't fit into one of the categories I had listed above. So the one-off expenses or, one-line expense lines added together, such as draws, repairs, other small items, uniforms for volunteers and for management, safety promotion, gas detectors, defibrillator expenses, and we're keeping the budget consistent with 2020 for 2021. Okay, thanks.
Seeing no questions. Go ahead.
Okay, so our capital program for 2021, I'm actually going to let Jeff speak to, as I don't know, or as he's more familiar with these items, and I'll jump in where needed. But I will let the board know that we did complete a building condition assessment for the ITFD in 2020, and some of these requests stem directly from that report, i.e. the roof replacement at the fire hall. It was noted in that building condition assessment that on the one side, and Jeff, you can provide more detail, there are some leaks and we need to replace the roofing at the fire hall. The bunker gear replacement, again, that's one of our cycle things. We replace so many suits a year so that we don't have to do it all at once. And every year we budget $20,000 to do that. And Jeff, I will let you speak to the rest, please.
Okay, thanks, guys. This time, under the $20,000 replace of the Hearst Combi tool. What a Hearst Combi tool is it's a rescue tool for extrication, or it could be to our service tech that safeties them every year. We have one that is not going to pass probably its next service, which is going to be this fall or this summer. So we're looking to replace one Hearst, or replace one with two, or get rid of one or get rid of two and have one. That's what I'm trying to say. As well, we're looking at a heat unit, AC unit. We don't have any heat in our fire hall. Actually, the way it works is I get heat in the winter and Andy gets air conditioning in the summer. We do have window air conditioners, so we're looking to put a system in that we can heat the whole office area and the basement as well. With our phone system update, we're looking to replace the wiring for our system. We have a voice over IP system now, I guess is what they call it, and we have switches, and we've had a couple of one failure with one of the switches. So it was brought up by the company that installed the system that to eliminate these would be a better system. Get rid of the wiring, get rid of all the old computer wiring, and put all new stuff in, all new wiring. SCBA mask, we're looking at we need SCBA masks for our firefighters. We're looking at giving each individual firefighter their own mask as well. We're looking at it's called a bayonet adapter with a 3M particle filter, which is COVID-19 a barrier, so it would work as a N95 mask. And we would, at that time, with these new masks, our guys are all fit tested, so there would be no fit testing as required under the N95. So whenever we have N95 masks, we're looking at that as well, replacing the SCBA mask, getting everybody their own personal mask. It's better if everybody has their own for more of a health and safety thing. And as well with the roof, we have a leak over on the north side. If we get enough ice built up, we do get water coming down the inside of the building, and we do have to look at replacing a portion of that roof over there, and we might, and re-insulating, I think, on the inside as well, because we have water in the insulation on the ceiling as well on the north side. And if there's any other questions, I think that's all I have for that, guys.
So I just have a comment to Mayor Klumpus's comment earlier. So those SCBA masks, those are something that would qualify for that COVID funding. So what I'm envisioning is, if approved by the board, when we purchase and invoice those to each municipality, at that time, each municipality could decide if they would be using their COVID funding to fund that. Again, that's an individual decision, and Meaford could decide to, and Georgian Bluffs could decide not to, and vice versa. It's just an exercise on the township side or municipality side books to determine how you're spending that funding.
Thanks, Cassie. I have a question before I go to Steve. A question for the chief on replacing equipment. Just update the board again. What happens to the old equipment?
If we were to replace equipment, the old equipment is surplus as our policy. With the SCBA masks, there is a potential to resell them to another department somewhere at moving forward.
I've never heard that, Jeff, so I don't know if we lost Jeff or.
Sorry, did I not go through there?
It broke out. I never heard a word, Jeff. It just went blank.
Okay, sorry, Dwight. If you can hear me, that's good. We do have surplus. We have to declare the equipment surplus, and under the direction of the board, and we could disperse of it as sometimes you can sell the equipment, and sometimes it just gets disposed of. There are third world countries that do use some of this equipment that's outdated, and that's where some of the stuff goes.
Oh, that's thank you. Now, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you, Dwight. And so this, probably to Cassie, this line on page 5 of the this presentation, it's normally 38,000. Now it's 114. I understand the roof is a one-time thing. Would some of these other things be a one-time thing, and this budget line could be reduced back in 2022?
Yeah, so it all depends on what capital projects we're doing and what kind of funds the board wants to set aside for the future. So my plan for 2021 is to get more on the asset management planning for the fire department. So what we need to do is, better lay out our plan for replacing capital assets. So sometime during 2021, I will be presenting a 10-year capital plan to the board. So you're aware of what's upcoming each year. And again, that will adjust that budget line.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cassie. I guess we'll move forward.
So that was all the expenses. So what does that all mean? And basically what it means to both municipalities is we're paying more in 2021. And a lot of that is driven by the increased fire calls and the increase in capital and also just the increase in cost of doing business. And again, I've laid out actuals back to 2018 so that you can see that 2021 is not a huge jump from 2018 and 2019. It's just a large jump from our unusual year of 2020. If fire calls happen to be less, then you'll be invoiced less and each township won't have to pay as much. So the lines for Georgian Bluffs and Meaford for fire calls are all dependent on how many calls happen in those municipalities. So it's our best guess. And the operating and the capital lines, those are invoiced to each municipality monthly. It's really difficult to, budget for the fire department because of the structure that we have and that we base a portion of the funding on the number of calls. So if we continue to operate, under this structure, we do need to look at how we are going to better calculate who pays what, and that reimbursing the board for the costs. Next slide, please, Brett. So just to highlight a few things we're planning for 2021, and I think I've already mentioned all of these. Asset management planning is very important, and you will see a 10-year capital plan come forward in 2021, as well as I'll be working closely with the chief and deputy fire chief to prepare a list of our current inventory with expiration dates and replacement costs so that we better know what's coming in the future. We'll also prepare a 5-year operating budget, again, just to help us to better prepare. And we need to do some long-term planning on the operating of ITFD. So Meaford did pass a motion that you were deferring any decisions on ownership for a year. But we do need to have those conversations and decide if we're going to continue in this partnership. We need to clean up that operating agreement so that we can better address, some of the issues that were identified at the fire department, being the reporting structure, allocating cost to each township, the fee for administration to Georgian Bluffs. So we need to start thinking about that and decide how we're going to move forward.
Thanks, Cassie. Before I turn it over to the board for questions, I want to commend you and your staff for such a great presentation for budget. Easy to see, very colorful, looks very good, and thank you very much for such a good presentation.
Thank you, Mayor Burley.
Now I'm going to open the floor up to the board. Does the board have any questions on the budget presented to us? I think, Barb, you have your hand up?
Yes, I do, and I'm unmuted. Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And Cassie, thank you I noted that too, what a colorful, easy to follow budget presentation. So thank you for that, was very much appreciated. In terms of looking forward as to how are we going to move ahead with cleaning up some of the things, I think this is an issue that has to go back to our respective councils. I will certainly take it back to our council And we will then look at how do we proceed further. My belief is that we have, throughout the whole process of the discussions that staff have been undertaking over the past 2 years now, with regard to the changing not the management, but rather the governance model associated with this partnership, is that as each stage comes along to our council, it has been approved and passed on to the next station. So I think it's time that we look at this seriously. It was from our council deferred to the 1st of November 2021, which would put us into the discussions and negotiations for our 2022 budget. But I think you're right that it is time that this needs to be discussed in perhaps the same manner as it always has been with staff. Maybe there's another model, and maybe it's we need to be looking at this, Dwight, to decide how best to move it forward with our respective councils. But I will be bringing it forward to our council at our next meeting, just to move it along so that we're not left hanging, and we're not leaving you folks hanging either. So with that commitment, congratulations again on the budget. I think you did a great job.
Thank you, Barb. Any other questions, comments? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, we have a motion before us. Would you ask for the vote, please?
Okay, when I call your name, please indicate whether you are for or against the motion as presented, being approval of the budget and referral of said budget to both respective councils. Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton.
For.
Councillor Paul Sutherland.
For.
Councillor Steve Bartley.
For.
Mayor Barb Clumpus.
For.
And Mayor Dwight Burley.
For.
Thank you, and that carries.
Thank you, Brittany. This point of the agenda, we're down to board inquiries. Does the board have any questions of the acting fire chief? Does anyone have any questions of the acting fire chief? See no hands going up. Jeff, do you have any questions of us? Any comments?
Just gonna update you on the start of our year. Our year has started to be a busy year. We've had a couple of structure fires, so it's starting out actually as a steady year, and hopefully things can slow down. Maybe we can have a slower year, which would be kind of nice too. But I just wanted to give you a heads up that we are starting off busy.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Andy, any comments?
No, it just it does look like it's going to be one of those years again, and hopefully we can just trudge along. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Seeing no questions, we'll move on then to our agenda. We have no closed session here today. The board will meet again at a regular scheduled meeting March 9th at 2 o'clock. I will now call for an adjournment of the meeting. Someone to move to adjourn. Moved by Sue, second by Steve. Madam Clerk, do you want a show of hands or a vote to adjourn?
Show of hands, please.
Okay, all in favor? It is carried. We're now adjourned. Thank you, everybody.